Welcome to the VandySports podcast on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick. This week's Vanderbilt football pregame show is brought to you by The Wash House, the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland & Belk, John Levin, good friend of the show, his company Wobble Bond Dickinson. Thanks the student athletes at Vanderbilt for their dedication and hard work, and Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. Topics on today's show are brought to you by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. A partnership began over 50 years ago in Purity Dairy here in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee, and they now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today, they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with Purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more info, visit their website at mpmci.com. Today, we're previewing Vanderbilt and Missouri, Saturday, 3:15 p.m. Central Time kickoff. You can watch it on the SEC Network, and as always, you can hear it on 102.5 The Game. Coming up on the show, we're going to talk to Joey Dwyer. We're going to get all of his things to watch and just dive into the matchup and how Vanderbilt can respond and get up off the mat after a very disappointing loss in Atlanta to Georgia State last Saturday. And then we'll check in with Andrew Allegretta, play-by-play voice, Vanderbilt football on the Vanderbilt Radio Network. There with Norman Jordan, Kevin Ingram. We'll talk a little bit about the Georgia State loss, but also draw a few comparisons to Diego Pavia and Thomas Castellanos, the quarterback that Missouri saw last week. Very interesting conversation there with Andrew Allegretta. And then we'll wrap it up with a guest from the Missouri perspective, Billy Jones, good friend of mine, who is a student actually at Missouri, covers that program closely for KCOU Sports 88.1 FM there in Columbia. So we'll dive into the Tigers and the matchup and how these two teams have had some tight games here over the years between Eli Drinkwitz and Clark Lee. So we'll dive into the matchup from the Missouri perspective with Billy Jones to wrap things up. This week's matchup preview is brought to you by The Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at The Wash House take care of that for you. With 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Log on to washhouseclean.com or sign up today and get your time back. All right, let's get into the game preview. Again, Vanderbilt 2-1 at Missouri 3-0. The Tigers are 20-point favorites in this matchup. 3:15 Central Time kickoff at Faurot Field in Columbia, Missouri on the SEC Network. It's the 17th meeting all time between the Commodores and the Tigers, with Missouri leading the series 11-4-1. Vandy's last win over the Tigers came back in 2019 in Nashville. Of course, if you remember, Mo Hassan, the quarterback there, led the charge for the Commodores, and Cam Johnson, who actually ended up transferring to Northwestern, local kid, ended up scoring the game-winning touchdown there. So Vanderbilt trying to find some momentum here after obviously a disappointing week last week in Atlanta. Last season when these two teams met in Nashville, Missouri won 38-21. It wasn't a blowout, but Vanderbilt really never had a shot in that game. Brady Cook and those receivers just had a field day. It was too easy. So I think that's a theme this week. Don't let Missouri just march down the field on you with their receivers. Make it tough on them, make them earn everything, and we'll talk more about Vanderbilt's keys to victory on Saturday. With the Tigers in the top 10 in the AP poll, Vandy is facing its 8th top 10 opponent under Clark Lee since 2021. So obviously you're in the SEC, you know what you're getting week in and week out. First official injury report of the season came out Wednesday night, and you're required as the coach, Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, is by the SEC to continue to update this injury report. Initially, there were a lot of players on the injury report. 4 guys are out on Saturday. Zaylen Wood is out. He suffered an injury against Georgia State. We'll continue to track his progress. Mark Davis is out for the season, so he'll continue to be on these injury reports. Boubacar Diakite, edge rusher, will be out against Missouri. We haven't seen a ton of him to start this season, so I think he's been banged up. Grayson Morgan is out as well. CJ Taylor, not an injury, but this is the penalty for the targeting call that he suffered against Georgia State. So he will be out for the first half. Eli Stowers and Bryson Coleman, a couple of tight ends, have been upgraded to questionable. Not questionable. They've been upgraded from questionable to probable. So Stowers and Coleman, you could see both of them play. I would think if you see one or the other, it's Stowers, because Bryson Coleman's still trying to get back. But that's great news for Vanderbilt, and I think Coleman's a guy that could play a little bit of receiver as well. So keep an eye on that. Cole Spence is also questionable. I doubt we see Cole Spence out there, but again, who knows? And if he is out there, that definitely helps Vanderbilt. Mo Hampton, the star position, is questionable. Doubt we see him. And then Corday Sidnor is questionable. I think he's the key here. If you get Corday on the field against Missouri, that's a huge help. So again, we'll continue to track those injury reports for Vanderbilt. A lack of focus and discipline last week, and even some guys showing up late to team meetings, caused Vanderbilt to lose in Atlanta to Georgia State, a Sun Belt team. And heading into this week's SEC opener against Missouri, Clark Lee said his team must come out as the aggressor and attack the Tigers.
It is so hard to win, and it's hard for humans to stay focused in general. Now we're in a high-performance environment, and the stakes are high every week. And the importance of ignoring external noise or external narratives when those are good or when those are bad, and just focusing on process and the work that needs to be done and showing up and being accountable, being dependable. That's what makes for good teams. And we've had a better week that way, but I don't ever want to sound like, I think that has to reset every single day. So again, I'm interested to see how we finish today, how we wake up tomorrow, and there's never a time where you can step back and say, we got it. Now, I think maybe in a few years, after we've strung together some success and we've built the nucleus of leadership, and we've, maybe then we can say, these guys got it. I mean, right now, they need to be coached, they need to listen, and the player leadership that we do have needs to step up and help strengthen the identity of who we are.
That's Clark Lee, Vanderbilt head coach, talking about this week's level of focus and how that had to change after last week. If you're Vanderbilt, you cannot lose focus and lose discipline and expect to win against anybody. And I think Clark has been hammering that home with this team. Can't wait to see the level of focus on the field Saturday against the Tigers. Speaking of Saturday, should be a beautiful day in Columbia, Missouri. Well, I say beautiful, maybe not quite beautiful. I think we do have some slight chances of rain, but the daytime forecast looks to be about 83 degrees, overcast with occasional rain showers at times, winds south at 5 to 10 miles per hour. So don't think it'll be too windy. 50% chance of rain throughout the day. So the game kicks off at 3:15 there in Columbia. And then into the nighttime, you will see some rain, thunderstorms possible, mainly late in the day. But the chance of rain ups the ante up to about 100%. So again, assuming it's a 3-hour game, 3:15 to 6:15, Vanderbilt should avoid a lot of the rain there. But again, we'll continue to track that and keep you guys updated there. Last week, again, brutal 36-32 loss at Georgia State after a late touchdown pass from Christian Veyer to Ted Hurst. They trailed by 2 scores late in the fourth quarter, but scored back-to-back touchdowns in just over a minute to take the lead over the Panthers. But Veyer, like I said, marched 80 yards down the field in just under a minute to win the game, and Vanderbilt's defense didn't do enough. I thought the offense did enough to win the game. The defense didn't hold up there into the bargain, so coming into this week's game against Missouri, that's a key. The defense has to play better. If the defense plays like they did against Georgia State, the only other team they beat the rest of the season is Ball State, so the defense has to improve. On the offensive side of the ball, Diego Pavia, I thought, really did enough. I mean, it wasn't his best game and started the game with a turnover, which, gave a lot of the momentum to Georgia State, but he still threw for a season-high 270 yards and a pair of touchdowns. And receiving-wise, Eli Stowers, what a night for him. Finished with 9 catches for 110 yards and a touchdown. So, again, Stowers is probable. I don't think he's 100% healthy, but I think he'll be fine and ready to go on Saturday against Missouri. Speaking of the Tigers, let's dive into Missouri. After 3 losing seasons, everything clicked last year for Eli Drinkwood's program. After an 11-win season and a win over Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, Coach Drink was awarded SEC Coach of the Year. And the Tigers finished with just its third top 10 AP poll ranking in 50 years. Pretty amazing. The Tigers have had to replace running back Cody Schrader, though. He led the entire SEC in rushing yards with 1,627 last season. Besides Schrader, they returned to 9 starters from a really good offense. We're going to dive into that offense here in a second. On the flip side, the defensive side of the ball for the Tigers, not as dominant as they were last year. At times, that pass rush was very dominant for the Tigers last year. They lose 8 key defenders and their well-respected defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, who left for LSU. So it's kind of an overlook there for the Missouri Tigers so far this season. They are 3-0. They shut out their first 2 opponents, Murray State and FCS team 51-0, and then Buffalo at home 38-0. And then the competition upped the ante a little bit with Boston College, Thomas Castellanos, and Bill O'Brien and that offense. It was a tight game, 27-21. It didn't seem, I watched that game, it didn't seem as close maybe throughout as the score indicated, but the Eagles came to play, and I think that's a blueprint for Vanderbilt to be able to follow, but it's also a blueprint for Missouri to not let that happen back-to-back weeks. So I'm interested to see how that affects this week's game against Vanderbilt. Back to the Tigers, again, their offense hasn't been clicking on all cylinders so far. They do average 482 yards per game, 279 through the air, 203 on the ground. But again, a lot of that came against Buffalo and Murray State. Boston College, was able to tighten their defense down and limit Missouri at least to an extent. Brady Cook, the quarterback, third-year starter, 720 yards through the air so far, only 2 touchdowns. But he has taken care of the football, 1 interception. So again, he hasn't necessarily lived up to the hype this season. He does have 4 rushing touchdowns, so he will run the football, and Vanderbilt has to be aware of that. We talked about Cody Schrader's departure, but they've got a couple of group of 5 transfers that have held up their end of the bargain. Nate Noel transfer from App State and Marcus Carroll from Georgia State. The irony there, Vanderbilt playing a former Georgia State running back on Saturday, but they've combined for almost 400 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns. So Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll, a couple of guys to watch there in the backfield for Missouri. Receiver, one of the best receiving corps in the league. I think everyone can agree on that. Luther Burden, arguably the best player in the country, one of the more dynamic players. Just when he has the ball in his hands, you got to be aware. You look up from eating your popcorn, and he could be in the end zone in a few seconds. So obviously, Luther Burden is the key for Vanderbilt. It'll be interesting to see how they match up with him. Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, a couple other guys. All those receivers are dangerous. And then defensively, on the flip side, Corey Flagg Jr., a linebacker, leads the team with 15 tackles. So that's kind of the outlook on the Missouri Tigers. Again, we're gonna get more into Missouri with Billy Jones from KCOU Sports out in Columbia to wrap up the podcast. So stay tuned for that if you want another look at the Tigers and an inside look at this matchup. But for now, let's head over to our interview portion of the podcast. We're going to kick it off with Joey Dwyer from right here at VandySports.com. Joey Dwyer from VandySports.com on to preview Vanderbilt and Missouri 3:15 kickoff on the SEC Network out in Columbia, Missouri. Joey will not be heading out there like he did down to Atlanta, but either way, we will be covering that game remotely. Joey will be doing some last-minute thoughts right before kickoff. We'll have post-game reaction as well. So I would guess the game ends around 6:15, 6:30-ish. So that's when you could probably expect a live post-game show to happen. And we usually try to get that out there about 30 minutes, after the game. So we get out of the press conferences. So Joey, we'll have that coverage ready and raring to go. But I want to talk about a few themes this week. And I think going back to last week with this team, really all week, and the focus was not where it needed to be. At least that's what it appeared. Thursday, Clark talked about that, and he basically admitted that this team was not where they needed to be mentally. He said the work on the field wasn't the problem, but discipline, players showing up late to meetings, which he admitted this week. So that's a problem, Joey. That can't happen, obviously. But I think losing to Georgia State probably turned that focus upside down. And they should be laser focused this week for Missouri.
Yeah, Eli Stowers saw on Saturday that this was a wake-up call for them. And Billy, I think the wake-up call, like we said, came at the expense of some things, but it seems like they've had a better week of preparation this week. Clark mentioned that yesterday. And I don't see how they couldn't have a worse week of preparation than they did last week. Obviously, he said it was fine on the field. It looked like their team practicing. But if you lose to Georgia State like that, I guess it takes your preparation in one of two ways. You either throw in the towel, which I don't think this team would, just based off the way that we previously thought they were made up. But
Right.
I think we've also figured out that this team is good enough to where they can go and surprise some teams if their mentality allows them to. But their mentality can also allow them to go into a place like Georgia State and lose if it's not good enough. And I think we figured out that this team has both sides of the spectrum there. It's not safe from something like that, and it's not safe from going into Mizzou and losing by 30 if it doesn't come ready to play. So I think their mentality is going to be really, really important this week, and I think it's got to be a lot different than it was last week, and it seems like it is. I'm going to ask Clark about that today, but I just think you need to see a completely different feel inside the building this week, and it seems like that is the case. I don't know how far that's going to take them against a team that's very clearly way better than them, but I think it would do a lot for Clark Lee if they go in and compete this week.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm looking at this week, Joey, Missouri gave up some explosive plays against Boston College last week. Big question, can Vanderbilt take advantage of that and stay ahead of the chains? Staying ahead of the chains, we saw against Georgia State, is very important for this offense. I mean, for every offense, but for Vanderbilt specifically, you need to have long, sustained drives, just like you did against Virginia Tech, just like you did against Alcorn State, right? Long, sustained drives where you kill the clock and you basically take away any fight energy, momentum from the other team. You just sort of suffocate them. They were able to do that through 2 games. Georgia State, they were not. Now, whether that was due to Pavia's health, we'll see. And that's a big factor, too, I think that we'll talk a little bit about later. But Missouri's defense is susceptible, Joey. They lost a lot from last year. They lost their defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, from LSU. So I look at this Missouri defense, and it doesn't necessarily scare me. Now, it could change my mind come Saturday night. Missouri has 4 sacks and shuts out Vanderbilt's offense. But I think this Missouri secondary is susceptible, and there will be opportunities for Vanderbilt. The question, Joey, is this offense good enough to have Pavia drop back consistently and complete passes against Georgia State? That concerned me with Pavia in the pocket. I thought Georgia State did a good job keeping him in the pocket, and they forced him to sit in the pocket and make throws, and a lot of those were inaccurate. So I think we finally saw a weakness of Pavia show up. Can he improve in 1 week? Who knows? But I think there will be opportunities Saturday against a Missouri defense that isn't as good as they were last year, Joey.
You'd think there'd definitely be some opportunities if they can put some pressure on them. And that's basically my question with this is, can Vanderbilt put enough pressure on them to get them to give up explosives? Because I think that's my question with the Vanderbilt offense is, do they have enough to have explosive plays? I think the blueprint has always looked more like these long, belabored drives that kind of suck the air out of you. And I think that's what it's going to be on Saturday, too. If they can put together a few of those, though, and kind of take the energy out of the crowd, and then maybe mix in an explosive here or there, they've got a chance. That's kind of what it looked like against Virginia Tech. You had the explosive downfield to Quincy Skinner for the touchdown. You had the long pass to Eli Stowers down the sideline that really sparked the drive in the second half. I think they missed that field goal, but point kind of stands there. I don't know that I'm confident that they can exploit any weaknesses on the back end consistently enough to have enough explosive plays to change the game. But I think that could be a huge compliment to what they do if they're able to push it down the field with the run game and just kind of slowly put together drives. I like that you mentioned getting ahead of the sticks, too, because I think that's one of the biggest keys for this offense. They really are not built to play from behind the sticks. They're not built for 3rd and 10. And obviously they converted a few times against Georgia State, but it's Georgia State, not Mizzou. I think if you're going to beat a team like Mizzou, or at least hanging the game with them, it's got to be as a result of keeping ahead of the sticks and just not really making mistakes like you did last week against Georgia State. They put themselves in a hole to where they had to throw it down the field for almost the entirety of the second half, and they're not going to win that way against an SEC team. They almost won that way against Georgia State, but I just think their corners and the coverage in the SEC is too strong for them to be able to consistently do that. I mean, their receivers barely got involved. Eli Stowers and Cole Spencer both questionable, so the tight end position might be a question mark on Saturday. I think they've got to stick to what they are. And maybe you can mix in an explosive here or there, and that's how you win games like this. So you're not supposed to win on the road. Boston College almost did it as a result of doing that. I don't know if almost is the word, but they were in that game for a little bit because of some explosives they had. I think Vanderbilt's got to mix in a few, but they're going to have to get ahead of the sticks. They're going to have to play turnover-free football, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's the blueprint for me. Play to your identity, do the things that make you difficult to defend, then maybe mix in some bigger plays to kind of counteract that and give yourself some momentum down the stretch.
On the flip side for Vanderbilt, the defense really struggled against Georgia State at certain points in that game. And you go back and I did go back and watch that game, and there were some good defensive drives. But they didn't do enough. You gave up 36 points to a Georgia State offense that, I think they put up 12 against Georgia Tech. They scored 21 or 24 against UTC. So, to be the defense that gave up the most points so far to a Georgia State offense is not good. So they've got a lot to fix defensively. And I think the good thing, Joey, is we know what this defense can do. We saw them against a dynamic rushing attack in Kyron Drones and Bashal Tootin. Obviously, Alcorn State is who they are, but this defense has a better performance out there, a lot better performance out there. They gave up some big chunk plays through the air in the third quarter against Virginia Tech, and then Georgia State. I think the secondary showed some of their flaws finally, especially at the safety spot and some linebackers in coverage. I mean, they could not stop that tight end Fleming on that same route basically over and over and over again. So, Joey, this is an opportunity for Brady Cook and Luther Burden to connect. They haven't been clicking on all cylinders. The Tigers offense hasn't, but that duo scares me right there. They've got a couple other good receivers, but if Brady Cook and Luther Burden are able to connect on some deep balls, multiple deep balls, this game will be out of hand. So my question, Joe, can the defense contain that duo? My guess is Colby Taylor is on Burden. I think that's a matchup you're not you don't hate if you're Vanderbilt, but we saw Colby Taylor really struggle against Georgia State's top receiver, Ted Hurst. So this defense is very important, Joey. This defense is a unit that can keep this team in games, but not if they play like they did against Georgia State.
I just don't know what to think of the defense at this point. I mean, the talent level is so much higher than it has been. I think you look at a guy like Brandon Fontenette, they hadn't really had guys like that paired with C.J. Taylor and Langston Patterson in the past. I just look at it, though, and you haven't really seen the production that you'd been hoping for out of that defense. You thought that was going to be a group that would keep you in games and force more turnovers. They've got, 3 turnovers through the last couple weeks, maybe 4. I think Longwell's interception was 4. Yep. But I just don't think they've made a big enough difference at this point in the season. They've got to be better. And they were fine against Virginia Tech. They're really good in week 2 against Alcorn. I just think they need a big week. And I think I'm a little concerned about them giving up explosives to Mizzou. I think they have the personnel to do it. They haven't really done it yet. That's all the talk out of Missouri this week is, can they finally get some explosive plays to hit? I think I've been asked that every radio hit I've done. But they have the personnel.
Every radio hit you've done?
Well, that's 2, so maybe not a whole one. I don't know if I'm that big stuff yet. There's supposed to be another one today, so we'll see.
Uh-oh.
But do you count as a radio hit, Billy? Since you are a radio guy?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Luther Burden and Theo Weiss, though, I think are guys that can really hurt Vanderbilt. And I think C.J. Taylor being out for the first half is a huge thing that hurts them. You look at the play where Ted Hurst scored the game-winning touchdown. Colby Taylor was in one-on-one, and Clarkley said he wasn't supposed to be. I think it was because Dante Carter kind of misread the play and left Taylor on an island out there. So, I mean, they have to be better. And I think their safety position without C.J. Taylor especially gives me a lot of concern that they're going to have to give up some explosives in this game. Brady Cook, I think, is a guy who is experienced and is going to take advantage of some miscommunications on the back end. You look at last year, I thought there was a lot of explosives in that game, if I remember correctly. Luther Burden, it looked like the best receiver in college football that day, Billy. And I think for Vanderbilt's sake, I'm a little nervous that that's going to happen again on Saturday.
Yeah, they just made it look easy last year. I mean, that was like a video game last year. It wasn't, I mean, it was 38-21, but it definitely felt a lot worse. So Vanderbilt, you know what they're going to do. I think, to a degree what Missouri's going to do. But they can also get you in the run game. They got a couple of good running backs. So we'll talk more about that with Billy Jones coming up. But Joey, only one turnover so far. First turnover last week, but I think it's when it happened in the game is what got me, and it was what I think hurt the team. It was a strip sack in that first possession. That gave Georgia State a lot of early momentum, and they took it and ran with it. But it still stands that Vanderbilt has taken care of the ball offensively as a whole. I know they had the safety there. That's special teams. But can that continue? And if it does, you give yourself a chance against Missouri. But to me, Joey, that's a big key. And, I mean, I feel confident they can because through 3 games – they've only got one. I mean, there's some teams you would imagine throughout the country, Joey, that through 3 games have 3, 4, 5 turnovers that have been really sloppy. I mean, look at Vanderbilt last year. How many did they have at this point last year? Right. So, I overall they've taken care of the ball, but that has to continue because if they turn the ball over against Missouri, that's another thing that immediately you take yourself out of the game.
Yeah, that's the type of thing that keeps you in a game like this is being able to take care of the ball and being able to extend possessions, get ahead of the sticks. I've been really impressed through 3 weeks about their ability to take care of it. I thought they were kind of unravel in that aspect on Saturday with just how sloppy they started out. I think that was a tone setter, like you said, with him fumbling there and Georgia State getting it in the red zone. And I thought Georgia State should have scored on that drive, should have scored a touchdown on that drive. They only kicked the field goal. But point stands, I do think they've been really good in that aspect. I think that's how you beat a team like Mizzou. If you're an underdog, you got to pair some explosives with ball security and finding a way to force turnovers on the other end. I feel pretty good about Vanderbilt's ability to take the ball or take care of the ball. I think Missouri has better athletes than they've seen at this point. And I think maybe that could hurt them, especially on the defensive line. I think they have better athletes than Vandy has seen. Maybe not better than Virginia Tech, but I think pretty comparable to that, maybe better. I need to look into that more. But, Billy, that's going to be a huge, huge key for them this week. It's just, can they take care of it enough to keep themselves in this game? And if they can they hit on some explosives to kind of counteract it? They've got a chance to do some good things this week if they can do both those things.
SEC opener, Vanderbilt at Missouri, coming up Saturday, 3:15 at Faurot Field. That's Joey Dwyer. Again, we'll be covering remotely. We'll have last-minute thoughts. We'll have a post-game show ready for you guys. Of course, offense, defensive report cards. Chris will have his gamer out there as well, so stay tuned for that coverage. Joey, have a good weekend, my friend.
Thank you as well, Billy.
Before we move on to our final 2 interviews of the pregame show, our guest line is presented by John Levin, good friend of the show. His company, Wobble Bond Dickinson, thanks the student-athletes at Vanderbilt University for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Our guest line is also presented by Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. And finally, Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm, longest-running sponsor of VandySports.com. Love those people over there. If your loved one has been hurt or in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call, 615-846-6200 to see what your rights are and if they can help. And now on to the interview with Andrew Allegretta. Keeping things rolling with Andrew Allegretta, Vanderbilt Radio Network, play-by-play broadcaster for Vanderbilt football in the booth there with Norma Jordan, also Kevin Ingram there on the sideline. Andrew, thanks again for checking in. Let's start with the Georgia State result. Obviously, a result no one, I think, saw coming. Georgia State came ready to play. Vanderbilt did not. I do think a lot of it is that simple. The Panthers came and they just took advantage of everything Vanderbilt gave them, ended up winning 36-32. Just paint the picture from your vantage point. I think you had a unique vantage point. The perch you guys had there. I don't know if you were in the end zone, but I think I saw a picture.
It was so good. It was great. It was so good. First off, how good was Norman Jordan on your show last week? I watched. Should I do a Norman impression? I gotta get back here.
Yeah. Yeah. You also need to be on your phone.
I do. I need a button down shirt. And I need to say things like, well, I gotta execute. Norman's the best. I love Norman. Booth was, for a baseball game, great, incredible booth.
So you're behind home plate, like
home plate.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I
thought. And it's manageable for one time. I think if that was my permanent booth, I don't know that I would be able to get it changed. I think I would politely request that it get changed, which is why Georgia State's home radio got it changed. I will tip my cap. This is inside baseball. One of my small pet peeves has been, if you're going to do something for the home team, you need to extend the same courtesy for the road team. I think that's just kind of fair across media world. And I tip my cap to Auburn because we go there. It will not be fun. It's another end zone view. But home radio is basically in the same spot. So
there you go.
It is what it is at that point. And I think Andy Burcham down at Auburn says he does a lot of stuff off of the monitor. For people that may not understand why that matters, it totally inverts your perspective. I think for a lot of us, we're very ingrained to talk about left and right. And that is only feasible when you're on one side of the field. When you take us to the end zone view, left and right are different depending on the direction that people are traveling. So when they're coming towards you, you're now inverting. Right is left, left is right. That becomes a challenge. And then when they're 140 yards away on the other side of the field, it certainly gets difficult to see exactly what's happening. And the TV monitors become a big deal. That's inside baseball. I think I'm always uneasy to talk about like our working conditions because people don't really care, nor should they. I do think this is one step above like, hey, they had really good barbecue for the press meal today. Like that conversation is, that's not necessary. But I'm pretty good with just about all working conditions. The one that that mostly, gets me, sideways is not a right word because it happened once and we'll all move on. We made it all work. But the one that I dislike the most is calling a football game from the end zone. That's for sure. We're out there talking about like, what's it? Pythagoras' theorem on like how far we are away because we're this high away. We're 140 yards away. So sides, A and B equals whatever it was. I was out there trying to retrace my high school math days to figure out like exactly the distance to see the other side of the field.
I'm sure Norman was all over that.
He knocked it. He's a math guy. He knocked it out in like 8 seconds.
Oh, there you go. Look at that. It's interesting you bring that up because I feel like Vanderbilt going into this matchup, you knew it was going to be different. You knew it was going to be unique. I'm not sure if you knew you were going to be, well, maybe you did. You knew where you were going to be in the booth at the game. But for Vanderbilt, anytime you go on the road for the first time and it's a Sun Belt team, it is a formerly known as Turner Field where the Braves played, and they've sort of shape-shifted it into turning it more into a football stadium. It's different. It's a different environment. This was a different opponent. Obviously, Georgia State was extremely well prepared, but obviously we know Vanderbilt, on the other hand, was not. We heard about a lot of the lack of focus, lackadaisical, preparation throughout the week. But I feel like that was a common theme in this game. Vanderbilt just was not ready for that environment. They were not ready for, I say environment, that wasn't what got them beat. It was their play. But I feel like that probably factored in a little bit. We're not at the nicest facility. We're in Atlanta. We're playing Georgia State. I just feel like it was kind of everything combined resulted in a really, really tough result for this team.
I think everything matters. I think the thing that matters most is the way that Georgia State played and the way that Vanderbilt either did or did not execute. The opening turnover is a big deal. The 9 penalties for 85 yards is an outrageous deal. The fact that 2 penalties directly led either to a touchdown being taken off the board for Vanderbilt or a touchdown on the board for Georgia State, they're massive deals. And we talked with Clark about Linus's roughing the passer and sort of, he went off on a little bit of a tangent back on Tuesday about how that is getting officiated and the letter of the law, the spirit of the law. and kind of the problems that Vanderbilt has run into on that particular penalty. But still, 2 penalties directly led either to a touchdown off the board, the holding on Chase Mitchell, or a touchdown on the board. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the one that got put on the board was then followed by the kickoff safety. So like that's compounding issues. Now the environment's a factor. Just because an environment's not huge doesn't mean it's not a factor. I can think back to with Virginia Tech going to Syracuse. Hokies fans hate going to Syracuse because they think they're walking into a bit of a lifeless environment and the team doesn't play well. Like a ranked Virginia Tech team went to Syracuse and lost. I think it was 2016 when I was there. And it's just, the energy just kind of drains out of you. And then especially coming off of 2 very successful games for Vanderbilt. I mean, you can get it. You can understand why it happened. I thought they would struggle early. I thought they would figure it out. I think the stuff that Georgia State deserves a lot of credit on is that quarterback played certainly one of his better games.
Absolutely.
And I think they absolutely schemed up Vanderbilt pretty well. And I talked with Norm about this, the way that they forced Vanderbilt out of their comfort zone with the option run. Like the way that they designed their defense was to force Pavia to give. And Vanderbilt didn't do enough up the middle to open up running space to get Georgia State out of that. Nor did they get to Eli Stowers perhaps as quickly as they would have liked in that ball game. And some of it was because Georgia State stayed on the field, I think 9 for 16 on 3rd downs. But Billy, all of it matters. I will say this, and I think we probably would get to this, but I'll toss it in now. I keep, and I have gone back to it a couple of times, what Clark has said and did say at the start of the season, where he felt like this program let one game define the season too often. And we talked about Wake Forest becoming UNLV a season ago. And Clark referenced what New Mexico State did a season ago, starting off, I think, 2-3 and finishing 8-2. Or even what Virginia Tech did a season ago, starting off slow and finishing very strong. Mm-hmm. So I think the task for Clark is, and yes, Missouri's difficult. Yes, it's a bye. Yes, it's Alabama. But the task for this team is to not let the Georgia State game define the season and get back out there and be ultra competitive. And they say it at the end of practice. And perhaps you've overheard it, Billy. What's our mission? What's our goal? Winning. They say it all the time. So you get back out there and you try to win some games.
Yeah, let's go into that. Missouri, a team that Vanderbilt's seen. They've seen a couple of guys for the last 3 years, Brady Cook and Luther Burden. You've got a couple of the really good receivers there. I look at the running back room there for Missouri, and I'm going to get more to Vanderbilt, but I just don't think overall this Missouri team is exactly what they were last year. Now that's rarely the case. You're rarely as good as you were if you win 11 games, as the previous year. But there's some opportunities for Vanderbilt. But on the flip side, what do you want to see? What are you looking to see and most looking forward to see from this team? Now, obviously, you just touched on it a little bit there, the focus, the discipline. But on the field, what are a couple of things you're really looking forward to seeing against Missouri 315?
Well, number one is the penalties, because that's 3 straight games for a program that typically has not let penalties become a narrative. And again, they were first a season ago for everything that last season was. They were first in the Southeastern Conference in penalties last year. They did not commit very many. The running attack has to be functional versus Missouri. And it's going to be difficult because Missouri's defense is very good. But if you can't run the football, you can't control the clock. And if you can't control the clock, then you're letting Brady Cook, Luther Burden, Theo Weiss. And you talked about their running back room. They did lose Schrader, but they replaced him with one guy from Georgia State who went for 1,300 yards last year and a guy for App State that had 3,000 career yards in 4 seasons at App State. So they're both pretty good. And if Missouri's going to take too many swings at you, I think Vanderbilt can still perform well. But, we know that the structure of the games, the way that Clark has put this team together, is not designed to try to beat you 49-42. We're designed to beat you 35-28, something like that. So getting that triple option however you want to frame it, the pistol offense, Tim Beck's offense, back to rooted in running the football is big. And I think, I don't know that it was, I say this cautiously because I don't think it was designed this way, but I don't feel like I saw Diego Pavia either let himself loose or was in situations versus Georgia State where he could be the totally swagger-filled quarterback that we saw in the first couple of games. Like, because of the way Georgia State designed their defense to force the running back give, like, we didn't really see Diego become that form of Diego until later in the ball game. And from an energy standpoint, from a wins-loss standpoint, I think Diego's got to be that version of Diego right away, regardless of the injury risk. Because if you cap Diego, you cap the offense.
Right. I'm glad you brought him up because he's obviously going to have to be that for this team this weekend against Missouri. Going back to last week, and last week was really the first challenge for Missouri. Yeah, they played Murray State and then Buffalo and shut both those teams out. So the defense obviously was pretty good. But their first challenge was against Castellanos and that Eagle offense led by Bill O'Brien, who I think people forget, which, Bill O'Brien and Castellanos, I think you can draw some comparisons to Jerry Kill and Diego Pavia there, and just the skill set. So if you watch that game, I'm sure you did in prep, what did you take away from Castellanos and how they were able to take advantage of what that Missouri defense gave them? And do you think, does that give you some anticipation that, hey, maybe Pavia can do some of the same things on Saturday?
Well, I certainly hope so. I would caution, I don't know that I see Castellanos and Pavia as the same type of mobile quarterback. Like, Castellanos is very quick. Yes, he's a runner, but he's got agility. And I think that's his strong suit. Whereas I think Pavia is more of the tough runner and doesn't have the same exact speed that Castellanos has. That doesn't make Pavia less than Castellanos. I just see them as a little bit different. I think the biggest thing that happened, Billy, in that game, at least watching a decent chunk of it, while I, totally just scrolled mindlessly on Twitter, was the interception that Castellanos threw at the end of the first half. Like, you could tell Boston College was starting to feel it, and then Castellanos tried to do too much, and they threw an interception, and Missouri took advantage of it, and they closed the gap. And then after that, Missouri had much more confidence. But Boston College was on the field. Castellanos played well. I think there's optimism there because of that. But my concern would be that Georgia State has put on tape successfully how to limit Diego Pavia running the football. And, we're in a new world era of injury reports, Billy. And we got our first one as we record this last night. And two significant pieces offensively are on it between Eli Stowers and Cole Spence. I think I would be more surprised if both don't play. But we'll see what happens, right? You've got to use the Eli Stowers, the Cole Spence, the tight end to loosen some of that up, right? Like, if they're gonna crowd up to the line of scrimmage and take away the edge rushes, like, you've got to be able to beat them over the middle in some capacity to loosen that defense up. The other thing is too, that's the way that Missouri likes to play defense. They are a man-to-man defense on the edges. So Pavia's got to make a play at some point with his arm to Quincy Skinner, to Loic Fungi, to somebody to get them not quite so confident to play man-to-man on the edges. So, we'll see how it shakes out. I want to see Diego play like Diego played, with that level of confidence and swagger that he did versus Virginia Tech. And it's not just because the results were there. I just thought everything looked and felt like a team that was out to prove somebody wrong versus Virginia Tech versus a team that kind of tiptoed into it versus Georgia State.
Should be interesting. Vanderbilt-Missouri, 3:15 kickoff there in Columbia, Missouri. You can watch on the SEC Network. You also hear Andrew Allegretta, 102.5 The Game in Nashville, along with Norm and Kevin Ingram. Andrew, safe travels to Como. Thanks for checking in as always.
As always, guys.
Billy Jones from KCOU Sports up there in Columbia, Missouri student, and good friend of mine as well. He does a great job up there covering Missouri Tiger football. Billy, let's hop into it. The Tigers so far this season, 3-0. Hasn't necessarily been the prettiest 3-0. Obviously, you put up 51 against Murray State. That's an FCS team. Buffalo, 38-0. And then last week, Boston College came into Columbia and really made Missouri earn everything they got, especially with that offense under Castellanos there. Through 3 games, I say it hasn't been pretty. They dominated the first 2 teams. But to me, that Boston College game showed a little bit of the weaknesses of Missouri. Would you agree? And how would you assess the Tigers through 3 games?
Yeah. Again, I think it's a very talented team whose schedule sets up really nicely for them. You can tell that there's a lot of experience on the roster, right? You get down 14-3 Boston College. All of a sudden you look up at the clock, you're 20 minutes into the game. You're a third of the way through. You're trailing by 11. Wasn't a lot of panic. They played really well at the end of the second quarter, found a way to lead going into halftime. Needed a 57-yard field goal to do it. You score on the first drive of the second half, but then you see, where some of the issues with this team are. Pass rush, they really don't have a good one. So it's tough to put away a game when you can't rush the passer. There's a lack of explosiveness in this offense that I think a lot of people were kind of disappointed to see. You thought maybe they could take that jump. My byline all offseason was, if the defense is really good, this is a playoff team. If the offense is elite, who knows from there? You could probably win a game or 2 in that playoff. But so far, all we've seen is that, the defense is good against the run, but you get them into key spots and they struggle. Boston College moved the chains a lot on third down. Missouri was super stout against the run game. But when it came time to getting Boston College off the field, they couldn't do it.
Yeah, and I want to get more into that Boston College game because really that's the game, at least Vanderbilt people are looking at saying, okay, see that, might have a shot. Similar style of offense with Diego Pavia. Castellanos, I was really impressed with him. Been impressed with him all season, especially in that Florida State game. Would you coming in this game, would you think that we could see a similar game that we saw between Missouri and Boston College coming into this Saturday?
I think absolutely. I think there's been a big emphasis on starting faster this week for Missouri. So you'd think they'd come out a little better, but Vanderbilt's an offense that's capable of moving methodically. And, I think the way Missouri's played this year, Boston College, had a formula going in, which is we're going to put together long drives on offense and we're going to give Missouri 4 or 5 yards to play, but we're going to buckle up in the red zone. And you look at how the first, pretty much how the first 2 quarters of that game played out. Boston College scores 2 touchdowns. They eat up a large swath of time on a couple of their drives. And then Missouri moved the ball well, but when it came time to scoring touchdowns, they kicked 2 field goals. It was 14-6, and then Castellanos gets a little greedy, tries to put a ball down the field. It gets picked off. Missouri scores a touchdown and then kind of grabs control of the game from there. So I think that's the thing that Vanderbilt's got to be worried about is there can kind of be one swing in the game that can shoot this thing the other direction. But, things had gone according to plan for Boston College before this. If you can possess the football, score touchdowns in the red zone, and, Missouri's shown that they're not really all that explosive. So keep everything in the red zone and buckle up in the red zone, eat some clock, and then who knows going into the second half.
I like how you mentioned that Missouri's not as explosive as they maybe have been. And I think a big part of that is the running back you lose from last year, Cody Schrader, who proved to be just a massive part of that offense last year. Right now, so far through 3 games, Brady Cook, 720 yards through the air, just 2 touchdowns, but only has 1 interception. So obviously hasn't cost his team any games. Cook, not a guy known to do that. What stands out to me, though, obviously we know about the receivers, Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, and Mookie Cooper. Those guys are all dangerous. That dynamic duo at the running back position, I think, could be what worries me if I'm a Vanderbilt fan. Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll combined for 396 yards and 3 touchdowns. And coming into the season, I had talked to you about Marcus Carroll as a guy I thought could maybe do similar things
to Cody Schrader, but all of a sudden here comes Nate Noel, and he's the leading rusher. So is the running game something that has impressed you so far from Missouri? Because you mentioned they haven't been as explosive maybe through the air as you thought.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to some degree yes, to some degree no. It hasn't been as dominant as I think some fans would hope it'd be. I mean, obviously it's early, and it's a fun combination where you get a little bit of thunder and lightning. You know, Marcus Carroll's a bigger back, a little bit more physical, runs a little harder. Nate Noel is just so shifty. You know, he's a guy that can see a crease and really split it, turn it upfield in a heartbeat. So I think that's going to be something to kind of monitor throughout the year. I think the more that Missouri gets into SEC play, I think we'll see more of Marcus Carroll, just because I think you need a little bit more size, and then they'll balance it out with Nate Noel. We'll see what that split looks like Saturday. So far this year, it's been kind of 70-30, 66-33, kind of in that range. Weaning Nate Noel, who transferred in from App State. Marcus Carroll came in from Georgia State. But, you know, what was really disappointing to me about that Boston College game, and I think a lot of Missouri fans, is, you know, they ran the ball really well in that first half, you know, up near 6 yards per carry. But the second half, you know, when after that first drive, they go up 24-14, had 3 drives in there where they really could have put that ball game away, and they really couldn't do it running the football. You know, anytime they moved the chains, it was mostly through the air or with Brady's legs. And I think what a lot of Missouri fans wanted to see in that game was just be able for Brady to turn around, hand the ball off. You run behind that offensive line and put the game away. You take out a 22-yard run on a 2nd and 59 where Boston College is playing Hail Mary defense. Missouri was under 3 yards of carry in the second half. So the question is going to be, I think, going forward, can Missouri run the ball when it has to? They've been able to run the ball when, you know, when the game's, you know, first half and then against Murray and Buffalo. But if they need it in key situations, can they do it? You know, I still got my concerns. And even on the last drive, you know, it was a 3rd and 6 that they needed to ice it against Boston College. They find Luther Burden on about a 10-yard out route, but they couldn't put that game away running the football, which I think is something that a lot of fans were disappointed by, because that was something they did a really good job of last year.
Billy, I wonder how challenged has this Missouri defense been? You know, last week, Castellanos, and you got to remember, Bill O'Brien, the head coach up there at Boston College, a really good offensive mind. So I think there were maybe even some NFL people that look at that and go, no surprise, O'Brien came in there with a good plan. Obviously not challenged much against Murray State and Buffalo. Are you concerned about this defense? I've heard some current concerns about the coverage in the secondary. Obviously, you mentioned they don't have you know, a dominant pass rusher. Blake Baker leaves. What's your concern level for this Missouri defense?
Yeah, I would say on a scale of 10, it's probably about a 4. You know, I think this defense is going to be very good. Again, I go back to can you get stops when you have to? And that's what separates good defenses from great defenses. You know, I think this is a defense that's, you know, going to be very good in most games. But, I mean, you look at that Boston College game, it was a scripted drive where Bill O'Brien threw some things at him they weren't ready for. But, you know, even if you want to go back to that, they had Boston College at 3rd and 15. Christian Williams has an illegal hands to the face penalty on the line of scrimmage that moves the chains. You had him in 3rd and 12. You know, Castellanos just makes a great play, finds a receiver to get 8 yards, and then on a 4th and 4, they score a touchdown on a play where, you know, I think Toriano Pride got beaten coverage, maybe a little bit of a push-off, but he needs to be stronger. And then I don't know if you saw the play where the snap goes over Castellanos' head. You know, everyone on defense runs at the ball. They score one behind him. And then on the last drive, again, you had him in 3rd and 10, couldn't get off the field. 4th and 1, you couldn't get off the field, and then a coverage bust allows BC to score. So that's where my concern is on those big 3rd and longs. When you need pass rush and you need your coverage guys to hold up to get guys off the field. I think this defense is going to be great against the run all year. I mean, they've got about 10 guys they've been rotating on that defensive line who are all playing at a very high level. They rotate through 4 linebackers. They held Boston College, who's an elite rushing offense, to under 2 yards to carry the whole game. So I have I don't have a lot of concerns about this team against the run, but against a team who can throw the ball, that's when I start to worry a little bit.
Well, and it's interesting. I saw in Coach Drinkwood's comments, I think it was on Tuesday, he brought up the Boston College game and how, you know, they brought some pressures, but this week
it sounded like Drinkwitz is more weary of Pavia running as opposed to Castellanos. Castellanos, if you go back and watch the film from that game and the Florida State game, he's almost more of a drop back, complete passes guy over his running ability. He can run the football, but Pavia is more of that creative guy that will run, and almost, you expect him to run. And if he completes a pass down the field of more than 20 yards, it's almost a surprise factor, like, kind of the dink and dunk style a little bit. But I thought that was interesting how Drinkwitz mentioned we may not be able to have the same plan defensively in terms of our blitzes for a guy like Pavia because of his ability to make plays off schedule. And, you can prepare all you want, but at the same time, that could be an interesting factor. If Pavia is able to extend plays, Billy, I think this could be interesting. Now, if Missouri is able to keep him in the pocket, a lot like Georgia State did, if you go back and watch that first play of the game, sack Pavia and fumble, and that's, that's the weird field of the game right at the beginning of the game. So if Missouri gets that, if they get a play like that, I think that'll be big for them and that defense. But if Pavia is able to extend plays, get off schedule, like you said, on those long third downs, I think that could be something that keeps this game close in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I think their main concern with Castellanos, they kind of blitzed on that first drive and then got out of it. They're very disciplined in the running game, played a lot of zone to try and keep them, keep everything in front of them. The way Drinkwitz was kind of talking this week makes me think they'll adopt a plan more like they had against, CJ Agbana at Buffalo, who's a very fast kid, where maybe you free up your rushers to go get the quarterback to flush him out, but you have a spy in Khalil Jacobs, who's a great chase down guy who they think can go get Pavia. And I think I think Pavia's physicality scares him. I just don't know if he has the same breakaway speed that Castellanos had, which I think Missouri was really worried about. But I think Pavia, in terms of just finding ways to get first downs, I think is better in that capacity than Castellanos is. So I anticipate seeing, I think, more man rush with a spy is kind of what Missouri is going to try and do, because they looked very uncomfortable playing that zone last week. So I'd anticipate maybe you free up your rushers. You leave a spy. I don't know if that's going to be 3 or 4. I would say it's probably 3 if it's 3rd and 7 or longer. And you hope Khalil Jacobs can go make the play on Pavia and then play man behind it was kind of the vibe I was getting. Although we'll see what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And final question here for you. These teams haven't met a whole lot. Obviously, before Missouri came into the SEC, it wasn't a common meeting. Vanderbilt hasn't beat Missouri since 2019. And you look at this, especially on the road. We joke about this all the time. The game a couple of years ago, just how ugly that game was, and how Vanderbilt had as good of a chance to win that one as anybody did. As Missouri kind of pulled it away late there with a 4th down stop. That 2019 game was ugly too. So, and Drinkwitz mentioned it this week. Vanderbilt's a tough out. They've been a tough out for us. Last year, Vanderbilt was non-competitive with a lot of SEC teams. I do still think part of that game, Missouri kind of, made it harder on themselves than they probably should have. But coming into this one, what are your expectations? And do you expect to see a Missouri team that comes out firing and maybe firing on more cylinders than they were last week? And then I'll ask for a little prediction coming up Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I expect to see that intensity, but I still worry about this Missouri's team ability to get off the field on 3rd downs. And Pavia is a kid who's never going to back out of the fight, and he's a guy that just I don't know exactly if there's a word to describe it, but just finds a way to make plays. So I think Vanderbilt will stay in this game and kind of that 10-17 range, a little bit like the game last year. I think Clark Lee is going to try and keep things in front of him. I would be interested to see if he decides, let's challenge Missouri. There's been some deep ball opportunities this year that, Brady Cooks, frankly, just missed open receivers. I wouldn't mind seeing, Clark Lee getting a little aggressive at Missouri, kind of daring them to make plays downfield. So I think Vanderbilt stays in the game. I just think with Missouri that there's a little too much speed on that team, a little too much talent. And we kind of saw it against Boston College. Anytime they needed a big play, they could turn to number 3 and find Luther Burden. And you look at, honestly, since Missouri's joined the SEC, Vanderbilt 3 wins over Missouri. I mean, trying to think in that time frame, who have they beat that many times? Tennessee, I guess they've beaten 5 times. So, I mean,
Missouri-
they've been as successful against Missouri as almost anyone else.
It's a good point, and I think from the Vanderbilt coach's perspective, that's what you're telling your kids going into this game. Of course, this is a different Missouri program than what they were obviously in 2019, but it's also not Texas. Missouri is a playoff contender. But I think the recent history of this game is something you can sell to your team if you're Clark League coming into this. So it should be interesting. I think I've always get excited when these two teams get together. 3:15 kickoff on the SEC network there in Columbia at Faurot Field. Should be a fun crowd. Couple of entertaining offenses. I mean, Vanderbilt does like to muck it up. So this could be a slower game, Billy. But either way, any chance you get to watch Luther Bird and Brady Cook in that offense play, it's going to be fun on Saturday.
Give me 31-17 Missouri on Saturday. I think is the final.
I can see that.
Vanderbilt covers. I think Missouri, it feels a little bit comfortable. Vanderbilt's kind of one play away the whole game. But it's funny, the juxtaposition of this game compared to 2 years ago, where Missouri barely held on to beat Vanderbilt to get to 3-4, and people were chanting to fire Drinkwitz at that game. Take a look at that. Just a 2-year jump to where they are now is crazy. Now everyone's fighting their butts off to try and keep them, hoping Florida doesn't come calling here in the next couple months. Should be a fun one Saturday. I'm excited.
Vanderbilt, Missouri, again, 3:15 kickoff there in Columbia. You can watch it on the SEC network. That is Billy Jones. He will be there covering the action. KCOU Sports there in Columbia. Billy, thanks for taking the time, my man.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Billy.
All right. Appreciate it, man.
That'll do it. Great stuff from Joey Dwyer, Andrew Allegretta, Billy Jones from up there in Columbia, Missouri. That's where Vanderbilt's headed. 3:15 kickoff, SEC network. The Tigers and the Commodores ready to kick it off. Can Vanderbilt respond? That's the big question. We'll see. They've got the momentum. Well, maybe not momentum. They've got the motivation to go up there and do what it takes to win. They're 20-point underdogs, but I think that's where this team is comfortable. Again, this podcast has always been free, and we plan for it to stay free. Here's how you can help keep it that way. A few things. Give the podcast a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to VandySports.com yet, please do. It's $99 a year, $9.99 a month. That helps us a lot as well. Also, go over to our YouTube channel, like this video, and subscribe to our channel. That's all you got to do. Like this video, subscribe to our channel. That's free. Don't have to pay. That's free. Also, leave a comment if you'd like, and maybe we'll get some of your comments and questions at the next episode. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. Again, that's chrislee70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy Sports Podcast.